Story 2, The Whistler in the Laurel. There's a phenomenon on the trail called woods crazy, where the isolation starts to play tricks on your mind. But I know the difference between a trick of the light and a physical impossibility. Deep in the thickets of the Smoky Mountains, I learned that some things in the wilderness don't just watch you. They mimic the sounds of your own safety to lure you into the dark. The rhododendron slicks in the Smokies are beautiful from a distance, but once you're inside them, they become a claustrophobic maze of twisted wood and interlocking leaves that block out the sun. I was pushing for a high-mileage day to reach the Icewater Spring shelter before a predicted thunderstorm hit. But the air had turned heavy and still, the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. That was when I heard it, a soft, melodic whistling coming from somewhere just off the trail, a tune my grandfather used to whistle every morning on his porch. I stopped in my tracks, my pack cracking as I shifted my weight. The whistling didn't stop. It just grew slightly louder, moving parallel to me through the impenetrable wall of green. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and fragile against the mountain. The whistling abruptly cut off, replaced by the sound of something large and bipedal snapping a heavy branch just out of sight. I stepped forward to investigate, but then I saw it. Hanging from a low branch was a small, hand-woven doll made of dried grass and human hair, swinging gently despite the lack of wind. Why did it have a scrap of my own red flannel shirt tied around its neck? The sight of that doll sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I reached up, my hand trembling, to touch the scrap of fabric. It was unmistakably mine, the same faded pattern, the same loose thread I'd been meaning to trim from my sleeve. I looked down at my own arm, and sure enough, a jagged strip was missing from my cuff, as if it had been bitten away while I slept. I didn't wait to find out who was crafting effigies in the brush. I practically lunged back onto the main trail, my trekking poles clacking rhythmically against the rocks. The thunderstorm finally broke, the sky turning a bruised purple as fat droplets of rain began to hammer the canopy. But the rain didn't drown out the whistling. It picked up again, the melody faster now, weaving through the thunderclaps like a taunt. It was the Ashokan farewell, the exact song played at my grandfather's funeral. The trail became a muddy sluice. I was sliding, gasping, my lungs burning with the humid mountain air. Darkness fell with a suddenness that felt predatory. I finally saw the dim silhouette of a trail shelter through the downpour, but it wasn't the Icewater Spring shelter. It was an old, decommissioned stone hut that wasn't on my updated map. Desperate for cover, I dove inside, the smell of ancient ash and wet rot hitting me like a physical blow. I huddled in the corner, my headlamp dimmed to save battery. The stone walls were covered in scratched symbols, circles within circles, and more of those grass dolls shoved into the crevices of the masonry. I tried to convince myself it was just some eccentric hiker's trail art, but then I heard a sound from the rafters. It wasn't a whistle. It was a wet, clicking noise, like teeth hitting together. I tilted my light upward. Hanging from the beams were dozens of those dolls, but as my light hit them, I realized they weren't just made of grass. They were constructed around small bones, squirrels, birds, and something larger that looked uncomfortably like a human hand. In the center of the ceiling, the largest doll was draped in a familiar neon green rain cover. My rain cover, which I had just checked, was still on my pack. I spun around to check my backpack. It was gone. The space where I had dropped it was empty. The whistling started again, but this time it was coming from inside the hut. It was coming from the dark corner directly across from me. A figure slowly stepped into the faint glow of my lamp. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and pale like peeled birch wood. It wasn't wearing clothes. Instead, pieces of hiking gear were stitched directly into its skin with fishing line. A Gore-Tex sleeve here, a nylon strap there, and pinned to its chest was my red flannel scrap. It didn't have a face in the way humans do. Its skin was stretched tight over a skull that lacked a nose or ears, leaving only two wide, glassy eyes and a puckered, circular hole where a mouth should be. It pursed that hole and let out a perfect, piercing whistle. The final notes of the funeral song. I didn't think. I acted on pure animal instinct. I swung my heavy water filtration bottle at the thing's head and bolted out into the storm. I didn't follow the trail. I knew it would be waiting for me there. I threw myself down the steep, wooded embankment, sliding over mossy logs and jagged rocks, letting the gravity of the mountain take me. I spent the night shivering in a hollow log, clutching a small pocket knife, listening to that whistling circle my position for 6 hours. The creature moved through the laurel slicks with a sound like dry leaves, never coming close enough for me to see, but always making sure I could hear that tune. It was waiting for the light to fade completely, waiting for me to succumb to the cold. At dawn, the whistling stopped. I crawled out, bruised and borderline hypothermic, and stumbled until I found a fire road. I flagged down a park ranger's truck 2 miles later. When I told him about the stone hut, his face went pale. He told me that shelter had been torn down in the 70s after a series of disappearances. There was nothing but a concrete slab left in those woods. He took me back to the station, and as I was drying off, I reached into my pocket for my phone. It was gone. In its place was a small, wet doll made of Appalachian grass, tied together with a single, long strand of my own hair. I don't hike anymore. I moved to the desert, where the trees are short and the land is open. But sometimes, when the wind whistles through the vents in my house, it carries a melody, a song about saying goodbye. And when I check my reflection in the morning, I notice another small strip of my shirt is missing. It's still crafting, and it's getting closer to finishing the masterpiece.